President Biden has no immediate plans to travel to Florida, but on Friday he approved an emergency declaration and offered up federal aid to assist in the response efforts. It all comes as his administration and a bipartisan group of senators announced a long-sought infrastructure deal totaling over $1 trillion. The president said the deal reminded him of his days in the Senate.
To answer your direct question, we have a deal. I clearly didn't get all I wanted. They gave more than I think maybe they were inclined to give in the first place. But this reminds me of the days we used to get an awful lot done up in the United States Congress.
Let's bring in the man in the middle of it all, West Virginia Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Manchin, thank you very much for joining us. So we saw that moment, a rare moment, John, the kind of thing we hadn't seen for a long time at the White House, Democrats and Republicans talking about a deal. But obviously, there's been a lot of back and forth since then. So give me the bottom line. Is there a deal here that can get 60 votes in the Senate and that Joe Biden will sign?
I sure believe there is, John. But before I say anything about that, I want to say that from all of us in West Virginia, our hearts go out to all of the families in Surfside, Florida, for this horrendous, horrendous tragedy. I want them to know that our prayers are with them, and we're thinking about each and every one of them. So God bless. And let me just say this. On the deal, absolutely. John, this is the largest infrastructure package in the history of the United States of America. And President Biden, there's no doubt in my mind, never has been a doubt in my mind, that he is anxious for this bill to pass and for him to sign it. And I look forward to being there when he does. I can tell you there's so much good being done. And I would hope that all of my colleagues will look at it in the most positive light. They have a chance now to review it. It's got more in there for clean infrastructure, clean technology, clean energy technology than ever before. More money for bridges and roads since the interstate system was built. Water, getting rid of our lead pipes. It's connecting and broadband all over the nation, and especially in rural America and rural West Virginia. So much good in this, John.
But help me understand where Democrats exactly are on this, because we heard President Biden announced a deal. Then we heard him say that he would only sign it if the Congress also passed a much bigger infrastructure bill, the one that Bernie Sanders is working on, that he wants both in tandem. Now he's walked that back. But Nancy Pelosi has said that she's not even going to bring up your bipartisan bill unless this bigger Bernie Sanders bill also gets passed by the Senate. And listen to how Elizabeth Warren described her understanding of what's going on here.
I can't vote for some small subset that, the infrastructure train leaves the station and child care gets left on the platform. Green energy gets left on the platform. Billionaires don't have to pay gets left on the platform. It's that all of the pieces have to move because ultimately it's one deal.
It's one deal. That's the way Elizabeth Warren sees it. It seems that's the way Nancy Pelosi sees it. So what is going on here? Are you sure progressives are going to support your bipartisan bill if they don't get a guarantee on something bigger also passing?
Well, John, I sure hope so. I hope they just look at the bill. We have two tracks, and that's exactly what I believe is going to happen. And we've worked on the one track. We're going to work on the second track. There's an awful lot of need, and everything they talked about is something that we need. John, I didn't vote for the 2017 tax cuts under President Trump. I thought they were weighted too much towards the high end, if you will. I think we need to make some adjustments, and I'm willing to step forward and make those adjustments. I've been very clear about that. But we also, John, have to take into account where we are in this country, what our debt structure is. We're $28.5 trillion. We cannot continue to add on things that we can't pay for. I've always said this, we're writing checks our kids can't ever cash. And this is going to put a heck of a burden on the next generation. So we have to be cognizant of that. But there's a lot of need out there, whether it be child tax credits, whether it be helping those kids have a start in life, whether it be fixing a lot of the human infrastructure that has fallen by the wayside, of helping middle-class, hardworking people have a chance to get ahead and enjoy the American dream. I'm all for that. To what degree, we'll see what we're able to pay for.
So you know what Bernie Sanders is working on. He's talking about a bill that's $6 trillion. I know that you suggest that's a little rich for in terms of what you want. But what is your bottom line? How much more do you want? As you just said at the top of this, the bill that you're negotiating with the Republicans would be the biggest infrastructure bill in the history of the United States. How much more are you willing to add on top of that?
Well, when you look at it, John, we've paid for all this. This is not going to be added to debt. The infrastructure bill that we've done in a bipartisan way has paid for us. We've used money that we've had. We've moved money that we had not used yet to make sure that it was used in the most productive way. I think we've all done a good job. And that's what we have to look for. And when we do the next piece of legislation, I understand the concerns, I understand the desires of everybody in my caucus and also on the Republican caucus. I know we can work together. Look what we've done. Look what President Biden has accomplished in 5 months. I've never seen this type of accomplishment in modern history from a president coming in, the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion, and then we do bipartisan bills on top of that. The hate crimes bill that we did 94-1. We just did the competition with China bill in a very bipartisan way. The endless frontier. So many good things, John. We can work this out.
But what's your bottom line? The question is, this is over $1 trillion.
The bottom line.
Bernie Sanders wants $6 more trillion.
Here's
what are you? How far are you willing to go?
Well, let me just say this, John. Right now, I never thought that the net corporate tax should have been 21%. I always felt 25 was very fair and balanced. So I'm willing to go to 25. I think that basically capital gains should be at 28%, not at 21. There's changes that we can make that still keeps us competitive. I'm not going to be supportive and voting for things that does not make us competitive. We're in a global economy. I want to make sure that we're the leader of the free world, that we can still compete, that we can still manufacture, create great jobs, and pay good salaries with benefits. That's what I want to make sure happens. Now, let's see when we do all that and make the adjustments, how much money do we have? This is how you run your household. It's how I run my household or our small businesses or large businesses. How much can we invest and how much return do we get on that investment? I want to make sure we pay for it. I do not want to add more debt on. So if that's $1 trillion or $1.5 or $2 trillion, whatever that comes out to be over a 10-year period, that's what I would be voting for.
Well, I think there's some real questions about whether or not this bill is truly paid for. But let me ask you about the bigger question here. You get hammered.
It should be, John.
You get hammered all the time, by fellow Democrats, especially progressives, who say you are constantly drawing red lines for what you'll support, and and creating limits on how far Democrats will be able to go now that you control all, the House, the Senate, and the White House. What do you say to those that say, why don't you draw some red lines with Republicans? Why don't you say, unless they come around and agree to the stuff you just talked about, bringing up the corporate tax rate again, some of the other issues, maybe voting rights, some of the other issues that Republicans are blocking, why don't you draw a red line and say, look, if you guys don't move on this, I'm going to go and endorse doing away with the filibuster? I mean, that's your leverage.
Well, John,
you are the man with the leverage.
First of all, and I don't wish this on anybody. John, I've not voted any differently than I've voted for 10 years. I've always been very moderate, very centrist. I tell people I'm fiscally responsible and socially compassionate. I want to find that middle, and I think there's always a middle to find. It's the way I live my life. It's the way I've basically been in public life, and I'm not changing. I'm sorry that this 50-50 worked out and people were unhappy with it, but it is what it is. And if they think that I'm going to change and be something that I'm not, I won't. And I've been very clear. I'm willing to meet everybody halfway. If Republicans don't want to make adjustments to a tax code, which I think is weighted and unfair, then I'm willing to go to reconciliation. That's how you're able to do it. But if they think in reconciliation, I'm going to throw caution to the wind and go to $5 or $6 trillion when we can only afford 1 or 1.5 or maybe 2, and what we can pay for, then I can't be there. I'm very, very openly. And I think we can find our priorities. We can help a lot of people and lift them up. But people have to get up and make an effort, too. We all have to be fighting for the same great a country that we live in, and so appreciative we're here. So I don't know what they're expecting, different than who I am and what I am, and they know me. I've been there for 10 years.
Well,
they know who I am.
Well, I think it's safe to say that you are probably the only Democrat that could have been elected to the Senate from West Virginia. So thank you very much. We appreciate you taking time to talk to us, Senator Manchin.
Well, I'm very appreciative to represent my great state of West Virginia. I can assure you of that. Thank you, John. I appreciate being with you.
Let's get the Republican response now from one of the lead negotiators on the GOP side of the infrastructure deal, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio. So, Senator Portman, we saw the president announce a deal. Then we saw the president say there's no deal unless you also, the Senate also passes this much bigger Bernie Sanders plan. And now we have this pretty incredible walk back from President Biden. So what is the bottom line right now? Where are we in all of this?
Well, first, I was very glad to see the president clarify his remarks because it was inconsistent with everything that we had been told all along the way. We were all blindsided by the comments the previous day, which were that somehow these two bills were connected. The reconciliation bill, which is $1 trillion of social spending that's going to be entirely partisan, largest tax increase in American history on the one hand, and the other hand, the infrastructure bill, which is bipartisan, has no taxes, focuses on core infrastructure, and has been bipartisan from the start. So it was a surprise, to say the least, that those two got linked. And I'm glad they've now been delinked, and it's very clear that we can move forward with a bipartisan bill that's broadly popular, not just among members of Congress, but the American people. Over 87% of people who were told by one poll believe we ought to do a bipartisan infrastructure bill because it's needed. Our roads and bridges are in tough shape. Our ports, our rail system, our grid, our broadband system needs to be expanded. So these are all things that people are looking for. So we were glad to see them disconnected, and now we can move forward on something that really makes sense for the American people.
So what's your sense? You've spent a fair amount of time directly talking to the president, to your former Senate colleague, President Biden. Is he negotiating in good faith on this? You saw the Wall Street Journal editorial board say this was a bait and switch. Mitch McConnell say it was head spinning. We've had the clarification. But can you, as you sit down face to face with President Biden, can you trust what he's negotiating with you?
Well, I think there's been good faith on both sides, and you know, it's true that there was a miscommunication there in terms of linking the two, but that was never part of our discussion and never part of the bipartisan group discussion that's been going on for almost 4 months now, and certainly not when the president and his team engaged to negotiate the final aspects of this. So the bottom line is it's a popular bill for all the right reasons. It's the right thing for the country. You know, every analysis of our infrastructure system gives us low grades. You know, we do have crumbling roads and bridges. We also are not competitive with the rest of the world. And this is the kind of spending, Jonathan, that is long-term, that makes our economy more efficient, therefore more productive. This is the kind of thing that's going to create a lot of great jobs and with good benefits. So it's something that we need to do to be able to compete with China and our other global competitors, and to frankly do something that presidents, you know, through the ages have talked about. I remember when Donald Trump talked about the need for a $2 trillion infrastructure bill, but so did President Obama before him, and so did President Bush before him. So we're finally getting something done here that's been talked about in Washington for decades.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a sight to see Democrats and Republicans together at the White House, smiles, a few backslaps. This is like about the least controversial thing that you could be working on with the other party. What does it say if you fail here? I mean, if you can't even come to an agreement on this?
Well,
how important?
That's a great question. By the way, I wasn't backslapping because there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
It's impossible to get things done in Washington these days, and so, you know, it's a minor miracle when you can pull things together, as you say. But you're right, infrastructure is different. We're not talking about health care or taxes. We're talking about something where there's broad support, again, not just among members of Congress, where we have now 11 Republicans and 10 Democrats part of this group, but also among the American people. And that's what matters, is that people are looking for us to get something done, specifically on infrastructure, but more generally to work together to solve big problems.
To actually show you can do that.
This is a step in the right direction in both of those categories.
So before you go, former President Trump was in your home state, was in Ohio last night. You weren't there. I understand you had a family commitment. But would you be on stage with him again at a rally? I mean, is he still the effective leader of the Republican Party?
He's definitely the leader of the party in the sense that he has high popularity among the Republican base, and that's what you saw last night. I think you saw a big turnout. But, you know, my view is pretty simple, is that the Republican Party and President Trump ought to focus on two things. One is policies. You know, during the Trump administration, a lot of good things were done for the country. Going into the pandemic, we had not just historically low unemployment, but we had historically low unemployment for blacks and Hispanics. We had the lowest poverty rate in the history of the country. We had the 19th straight month of wage increases of 3% or more annualized. So there was a lot of good stuff going on. We had to talk about that. The tax cuts, the tax reform, the regulatory relief was working. Our military was being rebuilt, and that was crucial and is crucial now as we face so many challenges around the globe. And the Operation Warp Speed worked remarkably well. So let's focus on the policies that worked and also on what's not working now, because the largest tax increase in American history is the wrong thing to do as you're coming out of this pandemic. So there's a lot to talk about. And second, let's focus on 2022 and getting the House majority back and the Senate majority. So that's what I would focus on and not the other stuff.
Of course, he was spending a lot of his time on that other stuff, the false claims that the election was stolen. Senator Portman, thank you very much for joining us. The roundtable is up next. Thank you, sir. The roundtable is up next, and later a preview of my exclusive interview with former Attorney General Bill Barr. He was astonishingly candid in telling me what he really thought about Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. We'll be right back.
I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there.
Joint Chiefs Chair Mark Milley with a fiery defense of the military over questions about teaching critical race theory. We'll talk about that more in a moment. First, our roundtable, Sarah Isgur, a veteran of the Trump Justice Department who is now a political analyst for The Dispatch. Former DNC Chair Donna Brazile. Ramesh Pamuro, senior editor of National Review and a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and CEO of Democracy for America, Yvette Simpson. Thank you very much all for joining us. So, Donna, I want to get to this walk back from Biden. Biden announces the big deal, then he says it's not a deal unless he gets, the big one along with it. And then this rather detailed walk back. I've never really seen anything quite like it.
I watched it. I watched the walk out to the tarmac, which rarely you see a president walk out to the tarmac. And then I watched the East Room presser. And I said, okay, what's the disconnect? I saw the disconnect, okay? Because he said on the tarmac, we got a deal, let's kumbaya. And then in the East Room, he said, but we also have another package that we have to put forward. What he did yesterday was clarify what he said on the tarmac. But the truth is that Mitch McConnell, who on June 15th, he understood that there would be a dual-track strategy. Chuck Schumer said early that morning, a dual-track strategy. In Washington, D.C., for those of you who don't know, I've lived here for almost 40 years. I call it this is like performative outrage. The Republicans are outraged because he said we're going to have two tracks. Yes, we're going to have two tracks.
No, but wait a minute. I mean, what he said, to be clear, is he said that he wasn't going to sign the bipartisan bill unless the other one passed. That's what he's walked back.
That is what he walked back, and I'm glad he walked it back, because now perhaps he can keep those 10 Republicans inside the tent, because as you well know, getting an infrastructure package in Washington, D.C. is as difficult as putting together an infrastructure project. It takes a lot of time, and this deal is still not done in my judgment.
I mean, spending money is usually the easy part, but Yvette.
On what is the question?
So, but let me get straight here, because Biden walked it back, but I haven't heard Elizabeth Warren walk it back. I haven't heard Nancy Pelosi walk it back. They're both saying that you got to pass the other bill too.
That is very true. And what I noticed was missing from that presser and that photo op was progressive members of the Senate. So you had the moderate Democrats who agree almost certainly with their Republican colleagues. You had no progressive representation in that room and at that press conference. That means that you didn't have the whole story. And progressives have been very, very clear. We know Republicans care more about bridges than they do about people. We know that they really are not prepared to help in the human infrastructure, but we will not budge if they're not willing to compromise. It is not bipartisan if Republicans don't give an inch, and they have given nothing here, and now we're not going to require them to support the other bill. That is the challenge. We worry that if you pass the bill, this bill with Republican support, then our Democratic moderates will be off the hook to support the bigger package, and we can't have that happen.
All right, we'll get to what Republicans have or haven't given up, but on this question, can Biden get Democrats to pass a bill, this bipartisan bill, if they don't have a guarantee that the bigger bill passes?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think
so it's both or none?
I think you have to do both or none. Progressives have been very, very clear about the fact that Republicans have shown they only care about physical infrastructure. And we have to do this bill in a way that makes sure we're fully inclusive, because reconciliation is the only way we're going to get anything done. And if we don't make sure that we've got the 50 votes or maybe the 60 votes to get it done, we're going to leave people high and dry. So yes, progressives have to put their foot down and say, if you're going to have a photo out with Republicans and they got the bill they wanted, what about the bill we need?
So, Ramesh.
So part of the difficulty that this is going to create, I think, for progressives who take that stance is there's a timing problem. The infrastructure bipartisan deal is at a much later stage of development than this partisan Sanders bill, which is really kind of notional at this point.
And you heard Manchin, by the way, say he's not he's not on board with $6 trillion.
Are you going to leave this infrastructure bill hanging for several months while you get this partisan reconciliation bill together? And are progressives really willing to say we're not going to vote for one of the Biden administration's priorities?
I think you just heard the answer was yes.
Even if it's things that they themselves support because it doesn't include other things they support? That sounds like a bluff.
And are Republicans going to be on board, Sarah? I mean, now that they've heard, they've heard the walk back, but they've also heard...
This is the problem. Biden snatched defeat from the jaws of victory here. And by doing so, with or without the walk back, he opened up this whole conversation. Now progressives have cornered him. Republicans feel like they got sandbagged. But, I mean, you do look at this conversation and everything Yvette was just saying. This isn't actually about Republicans. This is a fight within the Democratic caucus. Progressives want to corner their moderate Democrats to make sure that they don't lose their vote. It's not about the Republicans at this point. So whether Biden can keep those 10 Republicans, yeah, I think the walk back helps a little. But to Ramesh's point, what does it look like in 6 months if he has to wait for Bernie Sanders to convince Joe Manchin, which isn't going to happen? Is he really not going to sign this bill? Really going to let Nancy Pelosi have the progressive wing hold them hostage? I don't think so. But they have 2022 in their sights.
But Sarah, there's one thing we know about Nancy Pelosi, and that is she knows how to lead her caucus. She knows how to bring not only progressives but moderates to the table to achieve the goals for the American people.
She doesn't have much room for error now.
She has no room for error, but she understands how to put together the deal. So as I said a couple of weeks ago, this may look like boudin sausage and it may taste like something different, but it is going to come together. And Democrats know that the calendar is short, but the needs of the American people are long, and they've been waiting for not just the core infrastructure, rails, bridges, and roads, but they also want human infrastructure.
That's right.
I mean, we just had a pedestrian bridge collapse here in Washington, D.C. We're witnessing this horror in Florida. What are we waiting for? This partisanship is gotten so out of control that we're now debating the semantics of what the president is saying and not what the Democrats are going to be able to deliver. I think they're going to be.
I hope they will. On board with this. This is partisanship.
No. Democrats love to argue the finer points and the finer details because in making sausage, we want to make sure that all of the right ingredients, because we're going to get one bite at this. Because we know the Republicans don't want any taste of this. So we're going to do it right. And just relax.
I wish I had her faith and confidence.
I have lots of faith.
And I love this woman, first of all, but I wish I had her faith and confidence. I do not. The reality is if you're going to negotiate a bill on infrastructure and you don't have progressive senators at the table, then you're assuming progressives are coming along, and that's not fair. Progressives have been very clear about the fact that we have to take care of people first. Republicans have been clear that they could care less. And so we need to make sure that, and we don't need 10 senators to do a reconciliation bill. We don't need Republicans at all. Democrats could actually come together and say, we're going to protect people. And the people of West Virginia need human infrastructure more than most. More than most.
Should he have just bypassed this whole bipartisan effort and just gone right to the...
If you ask people in America who are suffering whether they care about that photo op, whether they care about whether the people in D.C. get along, they would say no. Every single study we have shown shows that the nation is bipartisan. You go to Main Street, Republicans and Democrats agree we need to do something. In Washington, they can't seem to figure that out.
But Ramesh, I heard some real frustration on Manchin's part, even in a conversation after our interview. He says that Democrats, and channeling exactly what you're saying, Yvette, are acting like they've got a 60-vote majority.
Yeah. Right, that's right.
But this is the narrowest majority you could possibly have.
It is a narrow majority, and it could prove to be an evanescent majority as well. And I think that Senator Manchin is mindful of that, even if not all of his colleagues are. And then there's just the question of whether the public's really wanting $6 trillion in additional spending after all of the spending that we've seen over the last several years, and the bipartisan deals that we've already seen. There is a point at which the public's demand is satiated.
Hey, so
it's like that tax cut. You know, we always talk about how much. Yeah. And not talk about the cost, the human cost, and the infrastructure costs. I mean, this is costing our economy money because we have not upgraded. We have not.
Right. There's a bipartisan bill. Let's get that signed and move on. And if you want to do the reconciliation bill next, great. Then do the reconciliation bill next if you can get your own caucus on board. But don't hold up the infrastructure bill.
That deal could happen any day of the week. It could happen any day of the week. It is the least.
That's why it took 3 months for them to sit there and do it.
Because Republicans don't want to do anything, but they could, and this is the bare minimum that you could get out of this.
That's right. So take it. Let's bank it.
We need more.
Let me speak as a former Hill staff. It takes time to make.
Donna Brazile, former Hill staff.
Former Hill staff, and proud of it. And by the way, the intern's going to get paid now. I wish I could come back from my experience. But look, this is a moment. This is a real important moment for the American people. They want Joe Biden to succeed. And a Fox News poll, I had to mention Fox News. I used to be on the network. And a Fox News poll, Joe Biden is getting 56%. I mean, he's getting some love. Okay, from Republicans. So he has.
And let's not forget, one of his promises was to work with the Republicans.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was a promise.
And he's going to not only achieve that goal, but also bring the Democrats to the table. Yes, the progressives and the moderates and everybody in between will come to the table, and we will agree that we need a dual track. It will happen.
All right, we've got to take a quick break. The Roundtable will be back with more. Up next, our exclusive interview with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison about Derek Chauvin's prison sentence. Stay with us.
The court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. What the sentence is not based on is emotion or sympathy.
That was Judge Peter Cahill sentencing former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin to 22.5 years in prison for the murder of George Floyd. Here to discuss the sentence, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who oversaw the prosecution in Chauvin's trial. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The maximum sentence here was 40 years. The prosecution asked for 30. He ended up getting 22.5. You had said the state never wanted revenge, that what you were looking for was accountability. Did you get it?
I believe that the sentence is based on the facts in the law. It's based on the criminal history score and the severity. Look, it's 10 years beyond the guideline sentence. The recommended guideline sentence is 12.5. We got 22.5. And I think that the judge is right, given the particular cruelty, the abuse of trust, committing this crime in a group in front of kids, this sentence works. Now, you can't replace the life of George Floyd, so true satisfaction is simply not available to us. But I think that this is certainly a sentence that reflects the seriousness. And, of course, this matter's not over yet.
I want to ask you about something that your Assistant Attorney General, Matthew Frank, said at sentencing. Please take a listen.
Being a police officer is a difficult job. We ask a lot of them, but we give them a substantial amount of training, and most officers do it right. This case wasn't about police officers, all police officers. It wasn't about policing. This case was about Derek Chauvin.
That, of course, is literally true. This was about Derek Chauvin, but obviously, in another sense, this really was about a lot more than Derek Chauvin, wasn't it?
Well, I'd say legally, Matt Frank is absolutely right. But historically, sociologically, you're right. It's actually about more than that. We had to focus on proving a case based on evidence in a courtroom. But I do believe that the larger society must grapple with the bigger issues. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has not passed. We need it to pass. All over the United States, states are looking at police reform. We need them to act. We need departments to act. We need prosecutors and we need other police officers to look inside and say, what can we do to build greater trust and greater cooperation with our communities that we protect and serve every day. So yeah, you're right. From a larger perspective, we've got a lot of lifting to do. And when it comes to Congress, I think they could lead the way by passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I think it's essential and the country needs it.
You heard President Biden this week saying that he's concerned that we could see a significant spike in violent crime this summer. I know you've expressed similar concerns, and you've raised the point that you just raised now, that we can't afford to have a distrust, given that, distrust between the police and the community they serve. So what steps need to be taken right now as we face this potential for an increase in violence now? You mentioned the bill in Congress, but what else needs to be done now?
Well, you know, yesterday I was at a community meeting right here in Minneapolis, and a group of pastors came together and calling themselves 21 Days of Peace. And this is a community-led effort with cooperation with law enforcement. So community said to the 4th Precinct inspector, a guy named Charlie Adams, where are the hot spots? And he said the hot spots are on this corner, that corner, and that corner. And local community people went to those hot spots and said, we're just going to hold this space. And statistically, a number of those spots have seen a reduction in violence. So a community-led effort to engage neighbors, to build relationship with neighbors in cooperation with law enforcement might just be the key all over the country. And I'll tell you this, we've seen massive numbers of people unemployed during the pandemic. People are out of work. People are worried about rent. This is injecting stress into the community, and sometimes that manifests in violence. I think we do need those economic supports. The unemployment insurance and the eviction moratorium are coming to an end. These things are going to add stress. They might add to the violence toll, and we've got to be aware of these things. Let's have religious leaders, faith leaders, community leaders get out there working with law enforcement to try to stave off what could be a difficult summer if we don't get ahead of it, and I think we need to.
All right, Minnesota Attorney General Ellison, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time. There's more roundtable ahead, plus why Bill Barr told me he thought Trump's allegations of election fraud were BS.